I gazed at the message on my phone, a faint smirk forming despite the seriousness of the situation. Flying to Rome with my lover. Enjoy being broke. James's final jab glowed on the screen, a smug farewell that would have stung if I hadn't been the one orchestrating his downfall. If only he knew. My name is Natalie, and at 29, I never imagined I'd be tracking my husband's attempted getaway at JFK Airport while working alongside an international task force. Yet here I was, parked just outside the terminal, watching everything unfold on my laptop's live feeds. The irony was almost poetic. James believed he was outsmarting me, siphoning off what he assumed were our shared finances. What he didn't realize was that those accounts were decoys, ones we had set up weeks in advance the moment I uncovered his embezzlement scheme. As the senior vice president of finance at Morton & Blake Investment Group, my husband had been systematically diverting millions from client portfolios. He thought he was invincible, too clever to be caught. But that arrogance would be his downfall. For weeks, I had sensed something was off. The sudden late nights, hushed phone calls, his new fascination with our financial setup. The first time I noticed irregular transactions, I didn't confront him. Instead, I gathered evidence and went straight to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. That's when Agent Catherine Torres became part of the equation. To James, though, she was simply Amanda, the stunning new client who had taken a keen interest in both our investment services and in him. Target approaching security checkpoint, Torres's voice crackled through my earpiece. He's with the female operative now. On my screen, James strolled through the terminal, his arm wrapped around the woman he believed to be his mistress. He had no clue she was one of the agency's best undercover agents, or that every move he made was being tracked by a team of law enforcement officers. Remember, I murmured into my mic, he's probably carrying the backup drive with all the transaction records. Don't let him ditch it. Copy that. The trap was set. All that was left was to watch his grand escape plan collapse around him. A small part of me almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Looking back, I should have recognized the warning signs much earlier. Half a year ago, James had pushed for us to consolidate all our accounts. I assumed it was about strengthening our bond, an act of trust in our marriage. He had made his case convincingly over dinner at our favorite restaurant, his deep brown eyes full of sincerity as he spoke about planning our future together. At the time, I was touched by his apparent openness. I never suspected it was all part of a much larger scheme to gain unrestricted access to our finances. What James failed to realize was that my background in forensic accounting wasn't just a bullet point on my resume. Before joining Morton & Blake, I had spent 3 years investigating corporate fraud. That kind of experience sharpens instincts that never truly fade. The ability to spot inconsistencies, recognize subtle financial irregularities, and sense when something doesn't quite add up, it all stayed with me. The first red flag had been his sudden change in routine. James had always been predictable, leaving the house at precisely 7:30 in the morning and returning by 6 in the evening. Then, out of nowhere, urgent client meetings began keeping him at the office until midnight. It might have been believable, except for the time he slipped up. One of his so-called emergency calls came from a Dubai number, which didn't make sense given the time zone difference. The second sign was his abrupt obsession with upgrading our home security system. He insisted on installing additional cameras and motion sensors, claiming it was for our protection. At the time, I had appreciated his attention to safety. Now, I understood the real reason. He had been worried about being monitored, particularly in his home office, where most of his illegal transfers took place. Our account manager called. He had mentioned casually the week before. She suggested diversifying some investments. I'll handle it. His confidence was nearly flawless, almost. There was the slightest hesitation in his voice, just enough to trigger my suspicion. That was the moment I reached out to Agent Torres. Within hours, we had a plan in motion. The FBI had already been tracking a series of suspicious international transactions linked to Morton & Blake. What they lacked was solid proof tying it to someone inside the company. That was where I came in. "I'm doing this for us," James had whispered that morning as he kissed me goodbye, believing I was still asleep. "We'll have everything we ever wanted." If only he realized that his dream of a perfect escape was about to turn into his worst nightmare. Just then, my phone vibrated again. Another message. This time, it was a photo. James, sitting at a champagne bar in the terminal, raising a toast with the woman he thought was his mistress. His words followed beneath the image. Thanks for making this so easy. By the way, I took a little extra from your personal emergency fund. Consider it payment for 5 years of pretending to love you. The words struck harder than I had expected. Even knowing exactly who he was, even after uncovering all of his crimes, something about the sheer cruelty in that final message made my chest tighten. I reflected on the night James and I first met. Both of us were new hires at Morton and Blake, sharing late-night takeout during intensive training sessions. I recalled how he had shown up at my door with soup when I was battling the flu, and how he had been by my side, gripping my hand, as I mourned my father at his funeral. Had all of that been nothing more than an act? Target is getting restless, Agent Torres reported through my earpiece. He's checked his watch 3 times in the last minute. I quickly pulled up the security feed from the terminal. James was making an effort to appear at ease, but I recognized the tension in his posture. His shoulders were tight, his grip on his phone restless, checking the time, no doubt counting down to his flight's departure. Then, I saw something that made my stomach drop. He was carrying my father's vintage leather briefcase. The very one I had inherited after my father's passing. The sight of it sent a jolt through me. Suddenly, this wasn't just about the stolen money. It was about every deception, every betrayal, every moment he had manipulated my trust. I thought about the clients who had suffered because of him, the families whose savings he had siphoned away, all while playing the role of a loving husband. Agent Torres, I said into my mic, keeping my voice steady despite the emotion tightening my throat. The evidence is in my father's briefcase. He always said it was the safest place for important documents. James knows that. He's likely using it to transport the backup drive and any incriminating files. Copy that, she responded. We'll make sure to secure it. On the security feed, James checked his phone again, his expression shifting from strained patience to outright anxiety. He had no idea his mistress had already tipped off airport security about a suspicious package, ensuring he would be flagged for additional screening. He was clueless that we had frozen the accounts he thought were safely emptied. And he certainly hadn't realized that his Rome-bound flight was now experiencing a sudden and unexplained delay. The game was over. I picked up my phone and typed a single message. Maybe you should talk to the police officer behind you first. On the screen, I watched as James' face changed. His usual confident smirk faded, his expression flickering with unease. He spun around instinctively. Of course, there was no officer standing behind him yet. But his reaction confirmed everything I needed to know. He was guilty. And he knew he was trapped. All units in position, Agent Torres' voice crackled in my earpiece. We have eyes on all exits. James was on the move now, walking briskly toward the international terminal, my father's briefcase clutched tightly against his chest. His mistress walked beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, a subtle way to ensure he didn't suddenly break into a run. My phone rang. The number on the screen was unfamiliar. I answered but kept my eyes locked on the security feed. Your little game stops now. James' voice was eerily calm, controlled. I have copies of every transaction you've ever signed off on. If I go down, you're coming with me. A chill crept down my spine. He was bluffing. He had to be. I had been meticulous, keeping detailed records ever since I first suspected his scheme. But there was something in his tone that unsettled me. Really? I replied, keeping my voice even. And what transactions would those be? Don't play dumb, Natalie. The offshore accounts? The shell companies? I have proof that you were part of this from the beginning. Who do you think they'll believe? The devoted husband trying to protect his wife's interests? Or the bitter woman out for revenge? My pulse quickened. He was trying to turn the tables, to make it seem like I was the one with something to hide. Typical James, always twisting reality to suit his needs. But he had overlooked one crucial detail. Interesting theory, I said coolly. Have you shared this evidence with Amanda? There was silence. On the screen, I saw him glance at the woman beside him. What does she have to do with this? Everything. I allowed myself the smallest of smiles. You see, Agent Torres has been very interested in those offshore accounts. The color drained from his face. I watched through the camera as he instinctively took a step away from his companion. But it was too late. With a swift, practiced motion, she had his arm twisted behind his back. James Anderson, you are under arrest for embezzlement and corporate fraud, she declared, her voice ringing clearly through the terminal. Within seconds, other agents closed in, cutting off any chance of escape. But then, something happened that I hadn't anticipated. James started laughing. "Oh, Natalie," he said into the phone, his tone dripping with mockery despite his circumstances. "You really think this is over? Check your email. I just sent you something interesting from the corporate server. Turns out your father wasn't as clean as you thought he was." My fingers trembled as I gripped my phone. My palm was suddenly damp. With a deep breath, I opened my email. There it was. A folder labeled Thomas Bennett Project Files. My father's name. I clicked it open, and as the documents loaded onto my screen, my entire world tilted beneath me. The records sprawled across my screen, transaction logs, emails, and meeting minutes, all dating back to when my father had served as chief financial officer at Morton and Blake a decade and a half ago. My hands trembled as I scrolled through them. The project files exposed a carefully orchestrated manipulation of financial accounts, cleverly concealed beneath layers of seemingly legitimate transactions. The pattern was unmistakable. It was identical to the method James had been using. "Natalie," Agent Torres's voice cut through my thoughts. "We've secured him, but he's demanding to speak with his lawyer first." A chill ran through me. "He knew," I whispered, barely able to voice the realization. All this time, James had been aware of my father's involvement. That was why he had sought me out, why he had insisted on working at Morton and Blake. On the terminal's security feed, I saw James being led away by agents, his usual smirk still lingering. He had anticipated this moment. Even now, restrained and under arrest, he clearly had a contingency plan. Agent Torres spoke cautiously. "Your father's case was before my time. What exactly are we looking at here?" Without hesitation, I forwarded the files to her. "James didn't devise this embezzlement scheme," I explained. "He uncovered my father's old blueprint and expanded on it. The offshore accounts, the shell companies, Dad had set up the foundation 15 years ago." The weight of the truth hit me like a physical blow. Every memory I had of my father, his unwavering integrity, the lessons he had instilled in me about honesty and principles, suddenly felt distorted. Had James been watching me all along, waiting for the perfect moment to use this against me? My phone vibrated with an incoming message from an unknown number. "I have more files. A lot more. Drop the charges, or everything about Thomas Bennett goes public. Your choice, darling." A wave of nausea rolled over me. James had played this perfectly. If the truth about my father was exposed, it wouldn't just tarnish his legacy, it would implicate numerous high-ranking executives at Morton and Blake who had worked alongside him. The fallout would be catastrophic for the firm and everyone linked to it. Agent Torres observed my reaction. "He's trying to use this as leverage, isn't he?" I nodded. "Yes, but he's made one crucial mistake." I accessed the original files my father had left behind, the ones stored on the encrypted drive I had found after his passing. These were documents James had no idea existed. He couldn't have anticipated them. My father had recorded everything, including the names of those who had coerced him into the scheme. "My father wasn't the mastermind," I said, my voice regaining strength. "He was the whistleblower. And I can prove it." The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. My father had been unable to come forward while he was alive, but he had ensured that I had everything necessary to finish what he had started. James had only seen part of the story, the damning portion. He had no idea he had just handed me the key to dismantling the entire web of corruption at Morton and Blake. Determined, I rushed toward my office at Morton and Blake, Agent Torres close behind. The building was nearly deserted at this hour, but I knew exactly where to go. My father's former office, now a neglected storage room, held the final evidence we needed. As we made our way to the basement level, I explained, my father suspected this might happen. He left me clues in his personal journals. I never understood them before, but now everything makes sense. The storage room was packed with old filing cabinets and abandoned office furniture. In the far corner stood my father's massive wooden desk, too heavy to be moved. I ran my fingers along its underside, searching for the hidden latch he had described in his notes. A quiet click sounded, and a concealed compartment slid open. "Got it," I murmured, retrieving a weathered USB drive. Before I could process my relief, a voice from the doorway froze me in place. "Ms. Bennett." I turned to find Harold Wright, the current CEO of Morton & Blake, standing in the entrance. His gaze was cold and unwavering. 2 security guards flanked him. "I believe you have something that belongs to the company," he said smoothly. This was bad. Keeping my voice calm, I responded, "Actually, this now belongs to the FBI." I handed the drive to Agent Torres, who swiftly secured it. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Wright's face, but he quickly masked it. "You're making a grave mistake, Natalie. Think about your career, your reputation, your father's legacy." A surge of anger rose in my chest. "My father's legacy?" I countered. "You mean the one you and the board rewrote when you forced him into your scheme? When you threatened to ruin him if he didn't help cover your fraud?" His expression darkened. "You have no proof." "Really?" I pulled out my phone and played an audio file. My father's voice, frail but resolute, detailed the board's corruption in his final days. He might not have lived to testify, but he had made sure the truth would be heard. Wright lunged for Agent Torres, but before he could get close, the 2 security guards, now unmistakably FBI agents, restrained him. As he was led away in handcuffs, I caught sight of James being escorted through the building's lobby. Their eyes met, and I watched the color drain from my husband's face as the realization hit him. His powerful allies were gone. There was no one left to protect him. Agent Torres turned to me, her voice soft yet certain. "Your father would be proud." I acknowledged with a silent nod, emotions welling up inside me. The contents of that drive held the power to uncover decades of corruption within Morton & Blake, not only clearing my father's name, but also dismantling the entire scheme that had thrived for years. James had believed himself to be untouchable, wielding my father's past as leverage against me. But he had never truly understood the kind of man Thomas Bennett was. My phone vibrated, a new message from James. "We can still come to an agreement. I'll tell them everything about your father's involvement." A small smile formed as I typed my reply. "Go ahead. The whole truth is exactly what I want them to hear." The next morning, I sat inside the FBI's Manhattan office, watching the fallout unfold. Across multiple screens, every news channel echoed the same shocking headline: "Massive fraud scheme uncovered at Morton & Blake. CEO and top executives arrested." Agent Torres handed me a cup of coffee as we observed the ongoing coverage. 17 arrests so far, she informed me. "Your father's evidence was airtight." The encrypted timestamps prove the board tampered with his original reports. They can't claim he acted alone. On one of the screens, James appeared, being escorted into court. His once pristine designer suit was now creased, his usual air of confidence replaced with a defeated expression. The news anchor's voice cut through the room. "James Anderson, alongside CEO Harold Wright, faces multiple charges of fraud and embezzlement." Sources confirmed that the scheme dates back 15 years, with new evidence revealing that former CFO Thomas Bennett attempted to blow the whistle. Agent Torres turned to me, her voice softer this time. "Your father's name has been cleared." I gave a slow nod, my throat tightening with emotion. Dad had sacrificed so much to bring the truth to light, carefully compiling the evidence while giving the appearance of compliance. He had always known the day would come when the truth would be exposed. He just hadn't lived long enough to see it happen. A new email notification popped up, this time from James' lawyer. "My client wishes to relay the following message: you've ruined everything. I hope you're satisfied." My smile returned as I drafted my response. Please inform your client that he ruined everything himself. And yes, I am satisfied. Justice has finally been served. 1 month later, I was seated in the courtroom as the judge read the sentences aloud. James remained expressionless as his fate was sealed: 20 years for corporate fraud, embezzlement, and attempting to flee prosecution. Harold Wright and the other high-ranking executives received similar sentences. The corruption at Morton and Blake had been completely laid bare. Under new leadership, the firm was undergoing a total restructuring. The federal investigation had also managed to recover most of the stolen funds, ensuring that the affected clients would be reimbursed, with additional compensation covered by the firm's insurance. It was my father's meticulous record-keeping that had made this possible, his final act of justice for the people he had tried to protect. After the hearing, Agent Torres approached me with an unexpected proposition. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division could use someone with your expertise, she said. Someone who understands these schemes from the inside. Would you be interested in consulting for us? I thought of my father, of how he had fought for the truth while shielding his family. I considered all the other corporations where similar frauds might be happening, the families who could be suffering in silence. Yes, I replied. I would. As I stepped out of the courthouse, a sense of weightlessness washed over me. For the first time in months, I felt truly free. My father's name had been restored, justice had prevailed, and I had discovered a new purpose. Sometimes, the most meaningful form of retribution isn't about getting even, it's about ensuring that the truth finally comes to light.